You're in for a fun conversation.
We are going to unpack a book from one of our fans, Patrick Hanlon, who has written a book, or wrote a book, actually, a long time ago, called Primal Brands, that's re-releasing, and he sent me a copy, and I thought it was interesting enough that I wanted to talk about it because I think that it offers some really interesting fundamentals on branding that I think we talked about it in relationship to personal brand. So...
Right. I think we see like such an opportunity, and that podcast really resonated with people. So some great takeaways for personal brand, but then of course, really tied into the Super Bowl, the Benito Bowl, and kind of all. He was a great example of kind of these things really living in real time.
So we chat with Patrick and he tells us a little bit about that. And then Kirsten and I, as always, go off and have our own discussion where we talk about a few brands that we love, like Othership and actually SoulCycle, that's making a comeback according to TikTok. And we talk about why we think those work and how we would apply kind of some of these lessons to a personal brand or things that we are doing with our personal brand. Brands, plural. So anyway, I hope it's helpful. And let us know what you think and give us some love. Give us a like or tell Patrick that you liked his book if you read it, and let's go.
Yeah. Hope you enjoy it. Let us know.
Hey everyone, it's Chris.
And Kirsten.
Welcome to Good Thinking Weekly, the podcast where we discuss the best of the best in brands, marketing, and culture.
Thousands of people, top execs from the likes of Complex, Klaviyo, Walmart, Wall Street Journal, and LVMH tune in every single week.
We run a creative consultancy in Good Co, so we know what it takes to build a good brand.
Subscribe on YouTube, your favorite podcast app, and Good Thinking on Substack for more.
All right, let's dive in.
Welcome to Good Thinking.
Hi, Patrick. Thanks for coming on.
I'm so excited to be here. I've been waiting for this. I think we spoke months ago, at least. Children have been born in the interim.
I mean, many children. Yes. No, you and I have been, you have been a long-term reader of Good Thinking, and you have written to me and I've written to you, and we've become friends over the internet, which has just been one of those wonderful things that happens from writing this crazy thing that I write. And you were telling me about your book.
In Good Co. I love In Good Co. And I think I reached out to you because I liked what you guys were talking about. I loved the kind of the width and breadth of humanity that you cover, and both in terms of trends and people and things going on and what's current and so forth. Yes. So I reached out to you because I think what you're saying is vital. Yeah.
Well, that's a huge
we appreciate
compliment. That's my plug.
Yeah, we really appreciate it, and the feeling is mutual. And I think, we want to have you kind of do a little bit of an introduction, and of course have the book here. We'll talk a bit about. But I think really what we want to do is
the new version.
Of course, the new version. And it was adorable.
Some people have the old version, which is the scary old cover.
Yeah, this is a major upgrade. So we should talk about this. So you have re-released this book. It's released 20 years ago, you said, when you sent it to me.
This is the 20th anniversary. Yeah, this year. It was published by Simon & Schuster in 2006.
I think when you and I were talking most recently, you talked about that, and you talked about how we were talking about how our laid off episode that we did on this podcast, went really there was so much response to it. And there's so much response to it because so many people are in a situation where they're now kind of out on their own, building a brand, trying to figure out what their next move is. And you and I were talking about it, and you were like, yes, you can apply primal branding to your personal brand, which I know some people have an issue with the term personal brand, but we just won't get into that today.
Sure.
But I thought that was really great because to me, I think, I'm talking to people all day and giving them my same advice, which often sounds like, start talking about what you know, and maybe that should be a Substack, maybe it should be a podcast, maybe it should be these other things. But I think you have some more fundamentals in there in your book, and the principles that you apply to brands that you can apply to being a creator, being just a general person out in the world of business. And I'd love you to dive into kind of what those are.
The hooks are, the concept of primal branding is based upon two tenets that are basically human. And the first thing is that we as human beings have something inside of us that makes us want to connect and congregate with other people. The second thing is that we learn through story and stories. well told. And we call that a belief system, because once you construct a belief system, and there are 7 pieces that go into that, and all of these things have a creation story behind them. They have a reason why they exist. They have icons. They have special words that they use. They have leaders. And once you string that narrative together, and once you have that narrative down, you have done the creation story, creed, icons, rituals, sacred words, lexicon, the non-believers, and the leader. And those are the 7 pieces of what we call primal code. So once you lay those out for people, and that's storytelling, we call it a strategic brand narrative. It's very strategic because each one of those pieces differentiates you out in the universe, and it's unique unto you.
So one of the things you mentioned is sort of the importance of an origin story. And I think some people get really caught up when talking about sort of themselves, right? It's like, I worked here, and then I worked here, and then I worked here, and I worked for this person, so let me give them credit. And they just kind of like list off their resume to you, and they list off the names of all of, like, they'll give you their titles. I have a major issue with titles. And that is another story. They'll list off kind of the places that they've worked. Oftentimes to me, like, like the fact that you've worked in this crazy, amazing, like, like traditional agency for me is not important. So you don't know what I think is important. How do you suggest that people kind of craft this story without falling into that trap?
Well, yeah. Can we back up on that? I don't mean to go,
Please. Yeah.
totally
Back it up.
30,000 foot level all the time. But I think that the thing is back to how we are told stories. Even as a child, we're told stories. This is your name, this is your room, your bed, your room, you're part of a family, and this is our neighborhood, this is where we live. We are told stories, and then we go into school and we're told what we're good at and what we're not so good at, and we wrap ourselves with these stories. And that, as we become teenagers, I guess, or young adults, we start to go, hey, these stories might not be accurate, right? And I'm even better, I might want to create my own story, right? And so how do we do that?
Amen.
And so this is all a part of that storytelling thing. And it starts with you. We were taught to fit in, right? And we're taught a career, basically. And we're taught how to live in a cube. And so those are kind of conflicting, opposing, paradoxical forces that we have to work ourselves through. So I think that one of the things that Primal does is helps us sort that out. And that
but really tying it back, and the people that are listening really want to know, okay, how are we taking those things, and how is my origin story in my personal brand? I've gotten let go, or I'm trying to be the next version of my multi-hyphenate. Like, what does that look like? Talking about the storytelling and the things that you know from your career and from the book, what are kind of the fundamentals that one needs to include in their story as kind of a personal brand?
Yeah. So you build your story, but make it relevant to whoever you're pitching to, because that's what you're doing.
And are there particular things that, you emphasize more than others, or you think it's like, no, start at the beginning?
And so I would build your social media, because that's where they're going to go in the first place. And so it is about, okay, here's where I'm from. Here's what I'm about. Here are the things that I believe, things that I believe in. This is why I exist, right? And then icons. The first or second thing I tell people to do is go out and get photographs. Yeah.
Worth investing
go out
in some
and
good
hire a
headshots.
photographer,
Yes.
find a friend who's a photographer, get them involved, do
And
something.
don't use AI, because we can all tell.
No, don't do that.
Don't use AI.
Yeah.
And then rituals. How do you like to work? How do you not like to work? Talk about that. What's the language that you use, which is immediately differentiating. And then who's the leader? You're the leader, but what's their leader all about is incredibly critical right now. So
belief systems, right? And things that brands can do in terms of, and you kind of kicked off in the beginning with something that Kirsten says all the time. And so I literally sent her a screenshot of my highlight in the book. I was like, this line, this is you. It says, when people believe in something, they seek out others who believe in the same thing. And it's very basic, right? But I think that actually right now that feels very not basic, or it's very primal to what I'm feeling at the moment. And I'd love for you to talk about how people can do that, brands can do that in a time when kind of putting I think actually Bad Bunny's a halftime show is a testament to this working out for people. But generally speaking, people seem to feel like they can't say anything. They don't want to tread on anyone's toes. They don't want to get canceled. They don't want to say the wrong thing. And so they just say nothing, which I think is potentially much more dangerous in the long term. And I'd love to get kind of your opinion on that for people and for brands.
It is. I mean, what Bad Bunny did is he just identified himself as Puerto Rican, which is an American territory, by the way. And
in case anyone didn't know.
As opposed to, but lest we forget, right? And as opposed to being, to try to hide that, which some people have done in the past, try to hide his, so that was all about his creation story and what he believes in and where he belongs and about his and our people. And his point was that we are all the same people, and which is smack in the face of what others are trying to propose. And so I think that he is a great example of taking his creation story and embellishing it with the grass that was moving in and all of the other icons that happened surrounding that. Where he told a pretty perfect story about who he was. And so I think that as we try to move into the job market or resurface in the job market, what are those things that amplify us? What are the icons? What are the images? And we express those through we develop a strategic brand narrative for ourselves, And so around our creation story, around who we are and what we believe in, the things that we like to do, the way we like to work, the places we like to go.
Sure. And I mean, I think Bad Bunny, it was literally a masterclass, and I don't think embellishing his story, but I think articulating his story down to every single aspect of it, the styling, the trees, the translator, like literally every part of it. And he really, to your point, brought storytelling to life for all of us. But I think one of the things that he did that just like moves you is that he really leaned into his belief system and he led with that. And so
he was popularizing his story.
Well, he was sharing it. He was openly from his heart sharing and believing in that so that you could too, both his story as well as your own. And I often tell people personal brand and things like that, actually start with your belief story. Like it matters more than your origin story. And, it kind of like that's what people want to be a part of. And I think you talk a lot about that in your book so we've got kind of the storytelling portion of it. Where do kind of the beliefs come in? And then what are kind of the other things from a personal
so you have
brand
rituals.
lens?
Yeah, so we have origin story, we have rituals.
They're not separate things. There are 7 things that go into the creation of the story. The thing is that in the past, people have done 1 or 2 of them, but you need all 7 in order to have that visceral, emotive piece that makes people prefer you above their other choices.
All right, give us the 7 again.
So you need all 7. It's not just...
So we have story, origin story. We have talked about icons. We have talked about rituals, which in this case, you kind of described it as like how you work, but there's obviously probably more ways that you could describe a ritual.
Yeah,
then there's beliefs. What are the other 3?
Creed, why you exist, your reason for being.
Okay.
Reason to believe, some people call it, right? Literally. And then lexicon. And then what you're not and don't want to become. But anyway, what you are not is huge in today's world. Actually, understanding what we're not and we don't want to become helps to define us, helps to define ourselves and what we really believe in and what we really want to pursue in our lives as a product.
Do you have an example of somebody that you've worked with, like an individual more than a brand, but like, I have a lot of things that I don't want to be, and I pretty much articulate them on a daily basis. So maybe that's great. I have 1 of the 7.
Well, there's been a lot of talk about Mamdani and who he is and what he is and what he is not. And And
I like
in
that example.
effort, he attracted more people than some people would have imagined, attract those people to the polls who formerly weren't that active. And so I think that in terms, you have to be careful about this when you're trying to get a job about what you'll do and what you won't want to do and who you want to be.
Yeah.
But I think that the thing is that we all have things that we prefer over other things and don't believe certain things. And
Yeah, I think
Yeah, so
articulating
express the
some
brand.
what
things
you
over
don't
others.
want
And you
is
want to be
huge.
positive and you want to be optimistic and you want to be a part of the team, right? And so,
Yeah, that's the challenge. I think that's kind of
yeah.
like one of the things that not all of these are so easy. I actually think they're easier for brands, and they're probably not easy for many brands because many brands are also terrified. Oh, you mean, okay.
And-
Another thing that I read that you talked about is sort of like the idea of doing things consistently, and like personal rituals, and like, can you talk about anything that you do like that? That's like kind of, what are your personal rituals that you talk about in your stories, or like things that you kind of use as examples?
Yeah, you have to be persistent. It has to be intentional. It has to be, it's a system. It's a methodology. And it's good to think of it that way because it's a way of driving value. It's a way of driving growth. Yeah, I'm constantly reminded. I try to write articles. I try to write, and period. So I get up in the morning at the dog stands on my chest at about 6:23, and then I go feed her, and then I make the coffee, and then I write. And so I write until uh, 10 or 11 or 12, sometimes until 1 o'clock. Use this handheld digital device to write on all the time. And most of the things, because writing
Okay.
is a 24/7, as you know, is a 24/7 thing. And we don't, fortunately, as writers, we don't have to set up oils or work the clay or anything like that. We can just write on a Post-it
Yeah.
note,
We don't have to get all the bottles of
Yeah.
supplements out in the morning and like make our drink every day.
Well, maybe not you, but yeah, but no,
No.
exactly.
No, but I mean, like, I actually really resonate. I resonate with the idea of rituals. Like, I credit the fact that I decided I would write on a Friday. Like, that's the only reason this letter exists, for example, or this podcast exists, is
Yeah.
that I created rituals around, like, I never work on a Friday other than on the letter. Like, I always, like, I'm religiously don't take meetings on Fridays. Like, I do think that kind of consistency is hard for people, but I do think that actually putting in these kind of funny little boundaries for yourself, like as people are coming into kind of talking, I think people should be talking more about what they know and doing that. And I think one of the things that's really hard for people around that is getting into the ritual of it. Kirsten wakes up and she's almost like, you can't really engage with her she has to have her drink and she has to work out, but then you can't engage with her until she's had her LinkedIn post out, because she's just like there, just trying to like, she's just in her writing headspace. But it's become a ritual, right?
Yeah.
Like I would say.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And I would recommend that 110% for anyone who's kind of trying to figure this out for themselves. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
All
those
right.
are my rituals.
Great. I think super important.
What's the trend that
three things every brand should do. What are the three things?
Straighten out your Instagram, get a photographer, right? Understand that there is the opportunity to become most brands are bounded, figure out how to become unbounded. And then, yeah.
Great.
That's it. I have two.
What's the
That's
trend
two.
that you're most excited about, Patrick?
I think that giving up advertising is exciting, and not for those in advertising, but anyway, I think sociologically, I think it's a good thing. I think that what's going to happen in the nearest future, I see people ghosting social.
Yes. That's already beginning. The
I think
beginnings are
you
there.
guys have mentioned it, and I've mentioned it, and that's why we get along.
Yes.
I think the other thing is, how do brands go wrong? I think that most founders, CEOs, CFOs, who are the only people that we try to deal with, by the way, really don't understand the power of brand and how brand can be used as a strategic advantage. In other words, we're trying to build communities. And sometimes that brand, the community that surrounds you, is always more important than the product, because without that community of people who are buying from you, your product doesn't exist. You attract the people who shared your beliefs. That's great. Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. Lovely conversation with Patrick Hanlon.
Yeah. So and we've talked about this, but he's a fan of the letter, and that's how we
Indeed.
kind of started talking. And one of the things that is really nice about this letter is that people reach out and they're like, hey, give me their feedback. Like, we chat about things I've written about, and he told me he'd written this book, and I was like, oh, tell me more. I mean, writing a book is maybe something on our agenda one day.
It's 100% something on our agenda. And I had met him when we first started, like 10 years ago, when I was doing all the meetings in Soho House. Yeah, we'd connected. So,
oh yeah,
funny enough,
back in the day. So anyway, he sent me his book. I started reading his book, and I was like, there's definitely some interesting things in here. And when I was reading it about reading the book, like, one of the things that kind of he and I had chatted about it, but like, I felt like it was a really simple framework for understanding brand. Like, I think there's a lot going on in branding, and like, we talk about active positioning a lot, and like, I think there's a lot, but this is, like, to me, some very fundamental stuff, and it's a really nice way of thinking about some of the fundamentals, and gives you kind of these like touch points that you can look to, and especially for thinking about your own personal brand. And we've had so many people reach out to us after that layoff podcast that we did. And I just wanted to, bring out, I thought this was a great tool for kind of an add-on to that conversation.
Totally. So we'll kind of break it down. Right now, we'll give you the takeaways, but I think, it is a great, very understandable way to think about approach to branding, kind of, as he calls it, primal branding. And I do think the takeaways specifically, as we were thinking about them, really for personal brand. But one of the things that I also love about it is that it really leads, the kind of the big arc is kind of this belief system, which to me is like what you lead with in a personal brand, like who you are. And again, we'll talk a little bit about the Super Bowl, but Benito certainly led with that and showed us the way.
Yeah, and we talked about that with Patrick. And I think the funny thing is that, of course, like, after we got off that chat with Patrick, like, the first thing that comes to mind is I'm like listing off the brands that I can kind of identify as, like, I think these brands are good exemplifications of primal branding. And the first one that came to mind was Othership. Like, Othership does a fantastic job of telling their origin story. Like, Robbie tells you about how he had an addiction, and then he met his wife, and then he, like, with his friends. And like, I've heard that story one time and repeated that story 10 times. Like, I've told it to, like, everybody I know. So it's a pretty compelling origin story, I think, for a brand. I mean, they nail beliefs, like, over and over again. Yep. You see it everywhere when you meet,
and you feel it.
So Othership, for anyone who's listening, who's like, what is she talking about? And you haven't heard the podcast with Robbie from,
you have to go to Othership. We just recommended it to a client. She loved it. Like, we were just there in New York. Yeah, you gotta go.
It's like my go-to, and they're not paying us to say this, but they should. Robbie, hit me up.
Robbie.
But they are a contrast therapy, but they just do it in a really beautiful way. And now I'm constantly traveling the world, like, trying contrast therapy and, like, comparing it to Othership. Sure. So that's how I know they're doing something right. But
so bringing it back, though, fundamental, right? Because I think it's a perfect example, and I know that you have others that we'll talk about. So Othership is really about, like, rooted in, because the fundamentals of primal branding are really about that we all need connection and storytelling, right? And so if you think about, exactly as you're saying, Othership's kind of origin story, and Robbie hearing that, and then you literally feel that in every moment throughout the Othership experience. Maybe not the dressing rooms, but the sauna, like, literally as you're being guided through it, like, you feel that essence.
Yeah, and I will say that the dressing rooms in the new Brooklyn location are much nicer. So
great. All right, the other example.
Well, no, but I want to, like, unpack the things that he, like, so he talks about rituals, he talks about belief systems, and, like, vocabulary, and, like, or lexicon. And I think Othership does that really well. Like, they have, like, guides, and then you didn't like that they called them ice cubes or
snowballs. I thought there was a more intention, because they're called abuelas in, like, kind of more traditional settings. And I think that's so meaningful. And I think, you don't necessarily want to take that, but maybe we could workshop snowballs to have it be a little bit more meaningful.
Yes. Yes. I mean, when there are boilers, they're stones and not ice. But
yes.
Still.
Yes.
Just to be clear. But they use a lot of beautiful language, I think, that like has a lot of meaning to the language, and they're very deliberate about their language, and they're not inventing words, but they're pulling words in from and kind of creating their own vocabulary. And I think that that's such an great example. And there were 7 things, but like to me,
so seven, yes. I got them.
What are the 7? Tell me again.
Creation story.
Check.
Creed, why you exist.
I mean, he has that check.
Right. Icons, so the visual identifiers.
Yes, which, I think with Othership, like one of the things that they do is they also have they have this kind of visual language, like in their brand, like every brand should have. But, like when you're thinking about it from a personal brand, like I remember that you hired me back in the day because of how I typeset my initials at the top of a resume. That's what you told me anyway on that day. So, but that stuff makes a difference. And I think that,
for sure,
like how you choose to present, and everybody knows that with portfolios, but nowadays I get so many portfolios that are like sent to me and it's just like, here's a bunch of work. And it's like, when I think about personal brand, like, all of these things are so useful to kind of like look at tools for looking at your personal brand, because I think the visual language like that you use matters, like whether you're a copywriter, a project manager.
Yes. Any of it. And this could be a podcast in and of itself. Like I truly believe the way that you're sending it, like the amount of resumes I've gotten in Word, just literally the verbiage in which you're reaching out, to whom it may concern, or are you connected? Are you bringing, and that's where like personality belief systems to me is really like lead with that. Cause that's what people want. They want to hire you and what you're doing and who you are versus, exactly. Resume A or resume B.
Yeah, and I think this is just a nice, like, to me, it's like, am I not just checking these boxes, but like, where do I, like, when we started our company, we downloaded, maybe printed a workshop from a company out of the UK to like help us kind of identify our belief systems. And we were there with like Post-its. And I think all of that work still to this day is foundational, that we did in a living room, like 100%. Foundational to who we are as a company, right? And when you're going out on your own, and as so many people are going out on their own or partnering up, as I would recommend, we've talked about that on the podcast.
I mean, again, that can be its own podcast, so many reasons.
Right. But it's like actually doing this work, I think, is really grounding, and it can like help you sort of like, job searching is terrible. It's soul sucking. I mean, it's a little bit like entrepreneurship. Like you put yourself out there and you're just like, God, like, is that all I'm getting back? Like, wow. And it's grim. It can be really grim and soul sucking. And it's, I think, anecdotally out here, it's even worse than it used to be. And as you sort of realize that you have to be kind of more personal brand in order to succeed today, I think this stuff is really helpful. Like even the works we did with the LinkedIn people, like some of that was much like this. It's like, why, like, it wasn't just like, what are the content pillars that you would like? It was like, why do you have these content pillars? Like, why are these things important to you? Establishing that stuff is super helpful.
I think it's so important. And I think, we both kind of continue to do this in our life, whether it's like therapy or like I'm doing another course with Joe Hudson. Like there's different ways, because they should kind of change and evolve as you do, but there are also some fundamentals in that. So I absolutely couldn't agree more. Like it's so, so important. And I think helpful and useful, and also in like all of the things in not having a job or searching for one, like there's a lot of, confidence that you can lose. There's a lot just going on for you personally. So I think to have something that is grounding and that is kind of a fundamental that you can be like, yes, these are the things I believe in and kind of come back to, I think is important on a lot of levels. Okay. Yeah, so visual identifiers.
Visual identifiers, rituals, which, I talked about with Patrick, is like, I really attribute the rituals that I have to like the success of the letter. And I think, you know, many people in life attribute like rituals, and like you just have to find the ones that work for you. And but even being able to talk about them, they add to your story. Like they make you sound kind of crazy in a really good way. So I highly recommend.
Yes. I think we both have rituals on that end of that spectrum, which I fully embrace. Okay, lexicon. So words, unique language.
Yes, which I find to be hard to do, like for branding agencies. I think, like for ourselves, like even just naming active positioning and like talking about like that's always like we're still not even sure that that's the words that we use, but that's the words we use today. And slowly over time, it has kind of like sat, and it does take time for these words to make sense to people.
Totally.
But I think having your own perspective on like how do you do something and how do you want to speak about it. And, you know, I'm massive on like hating titles, and like even that to me is like a lexicon thing. Like we don't have traditional titles because I think they're stupid. But, you know, I stood my ground.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And then I think another important one is, you know, in all parts, but what you don't want to be, what you don't want to become. And I, for me, like being so that I always want to lean into kind of the optimism, the positive. I think it's not, you know, leaning into that, oh, I don't want to be this, and you're manifesting those things. But I think it's really about like being very clear. You don't want to be, and you can't be everything to everybody. So like be very clear on who you are and who you're not.
I mean, you even talk about that in your origin story, like all the time. You're constantly like, well, you know, like I wasn't, I'm not a traditional art director, and I'm not this. Like you actually use those in your origin story. So, you know, even though you're not into the negatives, you definitely do it. And I think it's, you know, like, to me, like, so, you know, I went to RISD, and like one of the things at RISD that this professor who was just my favorite professor, he was like, you know, we don't train people at RISD to be the beginning, like we train them to be at the end, right? Like the top of the funnel. So we're training you to be the creative director, we're training you to be the CEO. We're not really training you to be the graphic designer. You've got to figure out how you got to get there, right? But even that, like, as a boundary, it was like, I always said, like, I'm never going to be the best person at Illustrator. I'm never going to be the best renderer. And the reason that you don't want to be the best at those things is because when you become the best at those things, like everyone's like, oh, great. Like, here, go over here and be that. Like, even for AI, for me, I use AI tools all the time, and I'm teaching myself how to use Claude Code, and I'm doing all of these crazy things with it. But I'm not trying to be the Claude Code expert, right? And I'll never be that. And even just saying like, hey, like I don't want to niche down. Like all of these things, they don't have to be negative, but I do think the boundaries that you set for yourself actually end up being strengths. And they can feel like you're turning off something and saying no. And that's hard for people when they're job searching, but I actually think it comes across as more confident.
100%. And like, you know, I'm going to take us to Benito, because I think that's very similar in him, you know, not singing in English, right? And making sure that it was Spanish. Like he held true to those boundaries and who he was in that belief system, and didn't compromise, as so many would and have. And I think that's so much of what we're all leaning into with that.
Right.
So yes. And the last one, leader who's driving it.
Right, which in the personal brand is you. But, and I will say that a lot of people, and this is maybe just a personal preference, but a lot of people will be like, I like, you know, mentored under da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and I just don't care. But what I do care about is when people say, I met this great guy or great woman, and she taught me this, and this is like part of my leadership style. Like that I like. I don't really care about the other person's name, but I like that you kind of...
The pedigree isn't important, but the action.
Yeah, the amassing of the right, like where you're like, okay, this is like, you've created your leadership style by, you know, obviously learning from leaders. But I don't care about if you work for, like, even if you work for like somebody famous, I just don't care.
Yeah, right.
It rarely often means that it worked out for you. Like,
right.
Like, You're great if you're great, and you're not great if you, like, it doesn't matter if you've trained to do something.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes that can get you in the door. And I do think one of the things I was just talking to my neighbor who's in the industry and like thinking about making a move. And I'm just thinking about like, you know, your resume and where you have gone. Like those are all, you know, kind of pieces in your closet. They're all of the names of the agencies or the companies, or, you know, you're saying that I endorse and I identify with this particular brand or company or agency or whatever it is. And that's a part of your story. That's a part of, you know, what you're creating. And I think you have to interview and think about it as much for you wanting kind of to be a part of that as they do wanting you to be a part of their company or brand.
100%. And we've talked all the time about, like, somebody very smart that I saw speak at Paradigm said, like, you know, all branding is retroactive. And like, I think of this as like, it's exactly this exercise. Like you have to go back each time, like every time you come out to look for a new job, like, or you do something like start a newsletter or like, you know, join a board or whatever, like your story will have to evolve for that moment. And like you have to rejigger the pieces. And I think, again, like what I like about this is like, do I have all my pieces together?
Yeah.
Like, do I have all the things that I need? Because you're going to have to reinvent it every time, which is exhausting. And so.
Right. It's a great framework. It's a great kind of checklist to be able to go through, whether it's kind of a company brand or whether it's, you know, as we're seeing it, more kind of personal brand, really relevant to our audience. All right.
Yeah.
Anything you had another brand that you thought fit into this Primal Brand framework?
I thought it was funny because I read, and I write about this probably in the newsletter, and maybe it'll have come out or maybe it won't, who knows. But SoulCycle is back, like on the TikTok.
I'm into that.
And it made, like when I read that headline, it made me think of you and I, right? And when we were sitting in Chicago or maybe New York, and we were talking about like, oh man, like you were like, yeah, like I just kind of loved SoulCycle. Like I loved being there, right? And it wasn't that honestly, it wasn't just that the classes were good, and it wasn't just like that the instructors were good. Like they are, but like, or were. But it was a lot about the experience of the brand, right? Like they had a good origin story, like you like connected with that. They had a lot of beliefs that they shared. They had tons of rituals. Like even the way you walked into the changing room back in the day, like was different than any other time that you'd walked into a changing room. And it was well before it was common to be like, here are your 2 towels. And like, these are the towels that you use.
It was
but like,
unisex.
Again, going back to Othership, like they give you these 2 towels and they tell you what they're for, and like that's a ritual, right? And instead of just like go pick up your towels in the corner, like you can take 2 if you want, it's a very different experience. And
100%, much more intentional.
Were pioneers in that. They had great like a lexicon of like words, and like it was just, they had a visual language to the studios that nobody had ever had, and they just did all of these things, I thought, very well. And then they were also unapologetic that they were like really for pretty intense athletes, which at the time, like those gyms weren't like, every gym wasn't like a cult, right? Like they really owned their cultness, and they were like, yeah, we are a cult, and like we're great with that, instead of just being like, we're just a place where you come and like do some cycling. Right.
Perfect example of like, not for everybody. It was for like a very specific type, but the energy, all of the points that you know, the experience all the way through to the manifesto on the wall, to the product that they were selling, the merch, to checking in, you know, everybody, all of the kind of the check-in people, all the instructors being hot and interesting and like having kind of this great inspired energy.
Yeah.
That was a big part of it.
The reason that SoulCycle went in the toilet wasn't because of those pieces going away. Well, as they grew bigger, they lost some of that control, right? Like, and they sold themselves and literally took on investors that made them not do that anymore. And I think that now people are coming back to it, and it sounds like it's coming back into its like old self, essentially. Like these things really like are sort of evergreen truths that can be, the people that love SoulCycle never stopped loving it. They just like couldn't access it anymore because they went away.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I do think COVID didn't help. And like I picked up a Peloton versus a SoulCycle,
Well, yeah,
but
but I mean,
I'm
like,
down to try when we travel. I'm totally in. Let's go.
right. But it sounds like, the world has figured out that they're ready to get back to being a community again. And they were really good at that. They were really good at community.
They were very good at, even down to like high five your neighbor at the end or kind of things like that. It was like a collective energy that they were really able. You went to a particular instructor because you liked their energy, you liked their message, whatever it was, and everybody had like a kind of a very different vibe, but I would say aligned vibe. It was great. I'm getting excited to talk about. Let's go. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm just saying that, like, to me, like, if I were going to pick two brands that like just kind of come to mind for primal branding examples, like these are great examples that I connect with more than maybe like, maybe Starbucks is a primal brand or once was, but like I can't connect with it anymore. So
yeah, I don't know. I think part of it, and it's not a specific attribute, but I think it's part of the bigger picture, is the experience. And I think the brands that we're talking about and the examples really have all of these fundamentals, but then they carry it through with the actual experience of bringing those fundamentals to life versus just having them, it's like having a brand book sit in a shelf somewhere, or like they're actually using these things to create the experience of how the instructors are speaking or how the, experience is being guided through or whatever it might be. They're actually bringing it to life through that experience with these kind of belief systems.
Agreed. Anyway, so that's my takeaway on the Primal brand.
All right. So
yeah, enjoy it. If you want to read the book, you can pick up your copy. Like, he's not paying us to say this, but here we are. And he has a new cool. Actually, the illustrations are pretty rad.
Yeah. Does a cute job.
And the packaging, like the back of Harriet really liked the back. She was like, "Wow,
that's
so
what
cool."
I'd say. Yeah.
So yeah, if you're interested and you want to do that, like, go buy his book. It's 20 years old, and I actually still enjoyed reading it. So that was cool.
There's some great fundamentals in there. Yeah, we'd love to know what you think. If you enjoy it, share it with a friend. Give the algorithm some love, and let us know.
Ciao.
Stay curious.
That was it for this episode of Good Thinking. Don't forget to tune in next week.
If you found this valuable, subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast app.
And don't forget to read on Substack for even more insights.
And if you really liked it, drop us a heart. We'd love to hear from you.
Ciao. Until next time.